Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Jaroslav Valuch. I'm from Transitions, which is a media development organization. We are running an online magazine covering events in the Central and Eastern Europe, but we are also running training activities for journalists and journalism students around the region. And we also do provide news literacy educational activities to publics. We've decided to do this webinar series a couple of days ago because there are a lot of webinars taking place discussing the disinformation and misinformation around COVID-19 and coronavirus, but we were lacking a little bit something that is kind of very practical, right? So having practitioners and experts sharing some practical experience of running verification fact-checking initiatives and also doing the monitoring of COVID infodemia. So this was the reason why 2 weeks ago we organized first webinar. I was actually the speaker. I was sharing lessons from building a volunteer student initiative that started doing fact-checking of COVID-19 related disinformation in the Czech Republic. So I will share with you the link to the video if you didn't have a chance to participate live, and if you are interested, feel free to watch it. And the follow-up session that is going to take place today will be very specifically focused on monitoring. It's a topic that I didn't cover too much in detail in the previous lesson because it does deserves its own time and some bigger experts than I am, who can give you much more practical insight into how to set up a monitoring system during crisis situations like the COVID situation or some, important events such as elections. So it's my pleasure to welcome today our actually two trainers, which is going to be Rastio Kužel and Ivan Godarsky. Both of them are from a Slovak NGO called Memo 98. We collaborate together on several projects across the region. And they will share with you the lessons and instructions and tools and methodologies on how to set up effective monitoring systems. So from the technical perspective, Rastio will have a presentation for about 30-40 minutes, and then the floor is open for your questions. Please, if you will have any questions throughout the session, feel free to ask. Please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and post the question there. I will follow this Q&A section clearly, and I will ask the questions in the room. Just technical check. Can you hear me, see me? Please type in the chat or Q&As, because we have Muhammad who says that he can't hear now. So let's check. Rastio, Ivan, can you hear me, see me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, please.
I can hear you too.
Participants, please type in the chat or Q&As if everything is okay.
Looks like others are able to hear us.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much. So please, Rastio, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Jaro. And also thank you very much for raising the expectations very high. But thank you to all of you who are interested in this webinar. It's our pleasure to share our experience. As Jaro mentioned, we are doing monitoring of media for about last 22 years. And for about five years, we have been basically focusing on social media monitoring. So a couple weeks ago, Jaro spoke about this excellent initiative in the Czech Republic, how they decided to contribute to particularly the debunking of COVID-19 related disinformation. We have our experience mainly focuses on electoral issues. So for these 22 years, we have been monitoring primarily media around elections. But with the COVID-19 situation, we also focused on this type of disinformation. So let me start screening, from my presentation, and basically, as I mentioned, we have for 22 years we are basically working in the sphere of media monitoring and elections. The white dots on this map are those places where we have worked, particularly in relation to elections, but also in relations to other projects. If to divide the activities more specifically, these are media monitoring elections, but about 5 years ago, we could not ignore the elephant in the room anymore. With social media, particularly after 2016, after the Brexit referendum, after the US elections, we realized that this is something that is really important to monitor. And I will explain maybe the initial hesitation, why we were happy with the comprehensive monitoring methodology for the traditional media, and why it's going to be virtually impossible to come up with a similar type of methodology for the social media monitoring. The other two areas we focus on, and that's where we also work very closely with transitions, is quality journalism and minorities. We have done projects together in this field. So when the COVID-19 pandemic started, many people, started volunteering, and on that slide you can see my wife, who basically decided to be, to start making masks as a volunteering activity, and and we live in Stupava, so she started making these masks for the House of Seniors. And here is a representative of the seniors club wearing a mask. Basically, I'm not good in sewing. You wouldn't like to wear a mask that I would prepare. So we had discussions with our colleagues, what can we do in this situation, how we can be useful. And we came up with this idea that we can be useful in doing some monitoring of COVID-19 disinformation. So we set up this type of monitoring, and we made basically our time, our expertise available for the Slovak Health Ministry. And when I say we, this was along with other organizations such as Digital Infospace Security Initiative, but also GlobSec and other CISM and other experts on this information. So basically, I will speak a little bit more details about how we set up the monitoring, and also the aim of this webinar is to be as practical as possible. So we will show you, along with Ivan, basically the tools that we use for social media monitoring, and the very specific tool that we used also for COVID-19 related disinformation. But before I get to that, I just wanted to walk you through some general points when it comes to social media monitoring. So for us, the starting point was to actually compare the previous sort of traditional media monitoring, which in our case originated in Columbia University, United States. And we first tested it during the 1998 elections in Slovakia. And then in 1999, we basically, after we had some solid or more comprehensive methodology, we started using it in many different countries, as you saw the white dots. But basically, we made it available for international organizations such as OSCE, EU, UN, for different types of electoral related monitoring projects. Very quickly, the main difference is that while in traditional media monitoring there are clear benchmarks to judge the media, there are clear legal provisions that exist, there are clear international standards. These are largely non-existent when it comes to social media. When it comes to the actual monitoring, it's more or less clear what we focus on when it comes to traditional media. So we are able to make a media sample, with mainly television being the most important source of information. It's also more or less clear when we start this monitoring and how we do it. When it comes to social media monitoring, it's getting more or less clearer now what to focus on. It's also getting more or less clear when we monitor, but it's still very open, and there are still different approaches when it comes to how to monitor social media, and we will speak about these details a little bit later. So one area where there is wide difference between what tools we use. I mean, for traditional media monitoring, this is very clear. I mean, you only have to have access to archive. You have to be able to have access to the actual media content. Whereas with social media monitoring, this is one crucial area that very much sets the rest of your activity. In other words, if you have a proper tool to have data access, if you have proper tool to scrap the data, and here I'm talking, for example, about Facebook. We have done monitoring of Facebook in about 6 or 7 different projects in about 5 different countries. We started with an open source tool, last year, basically for the EP elections. We were using an open source tool that doesn't exist anymore, which we were able to scrap up to 1,000 posts in one scrapping. Then later on, we started using Newsweep, which is also a pretty good tool. But it does allow you only to scrap 300 posts per one data scrapping. Currently, and that's what we are going to show you today, we are onboarded to CrowdAngle, which Yara mentioned a couple of weeks ago. But he mentioned the open source Chrome extension, which is available for everyone. But I want to show you today what excellent features the CrowdAngle itself has when you have access to it. And that's clearly for us, I have to say, it was a game changer. And we were able to use the CrowdAngle for the Slovak parliamentary elections. And I think it really generated rather different results. So tools are extremely important when it comes to social media monitoring. Obviously, what makes us less comfortable when it comes to social media monitoring is the fact that you need to use technology for at least for the data scrapping. You cannot rely fully on human coders and monitors as we do in traditional media monitoring. And this is one area where I think we still need more progress. I mean, there are projects which are using AI for this type of monitoring. Obviously, of course, we are talking, the main difference is the huge amount of data that you have in social media monitoring in comparison with traditional media monitoring. In traditional media monitoring, we have, for example, 6 hours per day on television, but you can still handle it. Whereas, I mean, you have, I don't know, millions of posts sometimes on social media. And so for this, you really need to have the technology, and it's not fully developed yet at this stage. It's for the purpose, I mean, it's very clear when it comes to traditional media monitoring, this relates to the benchmarks, so it's very clear what we expect from television, unbiased coverage when it comes to public broadcast, maybe less rigorous criteria for private but more or less this is set in the law. It's, as I said, set in the standards, international standards. When it comes to social media, I mean, this is still developing. I mean, we have a webinar tomorrow on Digital Services Act. So for those of you who are interested, I would like to invite you. But that's really, as you see, it's in the making. So we still cannot really say that we have really regulations for social media behavior during elections or otherwise. When it comes to the beginning of social media monitoring, at the beginning, we do some kind of capacity assessment. So we try to examine, what is the media situation in the country, what is the social media situation in the country, what are the relevant and important social media players or platforms that we need to focus on. The second thing that you take into consideration is your human and financial resources. The third, as I already mentioned, what sort of tool you will use for data mining, data scrapping. And the fourth is basically related to laws and regulations, because there are actually some regulations that relate also to social media. For example, the election blackouts, or maybe some other provisions. So what are we basically trying to find out? We first of all, we are trying to find out what is the impact of social media on electoral integrity. What is the impact? What are the threats? To what extent social media is used as a vehicle to distribute disinformation or misinformation around elections? To what extent they are used for voter suppression? But also on the positive side, to what extent they are used as a campaign tool by political parties to mobilize, to basically bring important information to people. Obviously, second important question is what is technically feasible. So if you don't have access to Facebook API, if you do not have the tools, obviously you can still do some manual monitoring, but you will not be in a position to maybe focus on 200 different profiles. Unless you have enough people, unless you have enough resources. So that is important question. What is technically feasible? And the third, again, relates to the regulation. So in a nutshell, we are talking about 4 different phases of monitoring. So we define the scope and we define the social media platforms that are relevant. So for example, in Slovakia, this was mainly Facebook. Currently, we are doing monitoring in Belarus in connection with the upcoming elections. And there, it's apart from Facebook, we have also included Vkontakte because it's a very popular social media platform there. So that depends very much on the country. Depends on the popularity of these platforms. The second stage is the data scrapping. So you need to have this tool to export the data, and then we mainly export it into Excel. So we have all the statistics from the various posts on the number of interactions, the number of comments, shares, and then we worked with this information in Excel, and we add additional variables that my colleague will speak about, particularly narratives and topics, but also keywords, which help us in the third aspect of this monitoring, which is the analysis. And the final part consists of reporting. So this is when you actually report on these results. So yes, again, depending on which country you focus on, you determine what are the relevant platforms. You see a tendency that many monitoring groups include Twitter, because the access to Twitter's API is easier However, it is now limited to 7 days of archives, and so it's getting a little bit more challenging also when it comes to Twitter. CrowdAngle allows monitoring of Facebook, Instagram, and Reddit. So these 3 platforms are covered. As for YouTube, we are using Newsweep for monitoring of YouTube, and that basically brings you the important information. When it comes to the methodology, we are basically recognizing sort of 3 different important areas of focus. So, and we call it, the first is basically the messenger. So this is basically the actor who is talking, who is sort of distributing the message. And with the messenger, we recognize about 4 different categories. So it's first of all the same as with traditional media. We are focusing on political parties. We are focusing on politicians. We are also focusing on social media accounts of traditional media, as well as journalists. And we are also focusing on a new category, which is basically social media influencers. So these are the people who basically have high number of followers in society, and so basically when they present information on their social media profiles, many people basically follow them. When it comes to the actual message, here we are focusing on topics and narratives, and we are pretty much using the content analysis that we have been using for these 22 years on traditional media. And we are trying to basically see to what extent, for example, divisive narratives play a role in elections. The third aspect, which is important, and where perhaps we are still not so experienced, this is the actual messaging. So this is the procedure which is used to amplify the message. So here, this could be bots or trolls that basically artificially amplify some message which under normal circumstances would not be important or would not attract such a huge attention, but by amplifying, by using certain tools such as bots, you can give the impression that actually this is very important because so many people basically follow, or so many people, it really caused a high level of interaction. So yes, basically this is when it comes to the messenger. When it comes to the message, again, we focus on topics, subtopics, and narratives. And my colleague Ivan will basically talk a little bit more in more detailed way about more specific, how we define these categories, particularly in relation to the COVID-19 exercise which we have been doing. And yes, the messaging basically is this amplification of the message by different bots. So maybe here I would make a stop, and I would invite Ivan to talk a little bit about how did we set up the monitoring of COVID-19 related disinformation. Maybe just the final word that it was a very specific monitoring for us. We used CrowdAngle, but Ivan will speak a little bit about these keywords and the way how he set up different clusters, which is different to when we do it during elections. So Ivan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Resto. Hello, thank you very much for your attention. I will be probably short. We might be interacting maybe later on more details if you are interested. Yeah, exactly what Resto just outlined. We try to cover COVID-19 from a not necessarily slightly different angle, but still there was a different angle because we had this tool of CrowdAngle, which allowed us to go deeper into monitoring COVID-19 crisis. And as you can see, This is nothing of short of attention up till now. We try to cover it for the crisis group for Ministry of Healthcare, as Erasto mentioned, and sort of supply them with the information specifically from the perspective how much disinformation is spread around social media and predominantly on Facebook in Slovak Republic. We've been doing it together with other NGO, as Erasto mentioned. And we try to basically, for doing it, we try to cluster the information. I'll show you in order to be clear what Facebook is offering us. These are the clusters which let me share the screen. This should be the screen. I hope you see it now. And there are different types of clusters. We created these ones, and that was at the beginning. Then we sort of decided to keep those clusters. First was very general, related to COVID-19 per se. Another one was zdravotnictvo, is like a healthcare system. Then there was medicines itself. Measures being taken. This is general. Then there was one on China, one was in Italy, one was in European Union, then there was in Russia, and then one was specifically for US or in Great Britain. And the slight disadvantage maybe of the CrowdTangle for those who might work with it or you might facing the opportunity to work with it later on is that it really requires very precise formulation in order to capture the interaction of the posts. What we actually wanted to achieve is to see all the possible vocabulary which might be spread throughout the crisis and in context of the crisis, and try to capture all the posts related to those words. So we basically created a list of, as you can see here, more than 300 keywords. If I would to say specific clusters at different words, but some words were basic ones, and we just need to use different declination because, as I said, CrowdTangle use very specific, very exact words. So if the comma is missing, or if you are using the longer terms, if you are using just short terms, every single dot might be simply making different results. So that's why we created the list of very similar words sometimes. And what was the outcome of it was actually very interesting. The CrowdTangle can give you the very nice list of information, and basically based on the keywords. For example, here is COVID-19. It provides you with the list of interaction of the most interacted posts which use this specific term. And we sorted it out according to categories. I don't want to use and show you everything, but principally that was what we wanted to show and to find out. And maybe one thing which I can show you was these were the top posts which rated more than 10,000 interactions in the period of 1.5 months from the 1st March. We took this period because this was the moment when the new government in Slovakia took over. Well, officially not really, but 29th of February was the election day in Slovakia, and 1st of March was first day of sort of new forming coalition, even for not formally. We are now preparing the final analysis when the first day probably will be 6th March, because 6th March was the first day when the COVID-19 was first positive case was detected in Slovakia, and probably the last day will be 3rd June when the state of emergency declared initially was finished. Throughout that period, we wanted to see how much of the and what type of narratives and posts were presented. Out of this, just very short overview. Out of this, which I have here, there were more than 60, which counted more than 10,000 narratives. There were only few which we actually could have seen as a problematic ones. I don't want to go into it, but what showed it to us at the beginning was that the discussion was not maybe that toxic as we have thought, or some people have thought, and that was very good information. Obviously, you will find many information which is toxic, which is directly spreading lies or news which are based on exaggerations, and that's why we created this joint group with other NGOs, which and we have one member of it, I think, maybe more in this discussion, so they can maybe add if they find it relevant, and they tried then to debunk the information which was still spread there. But the point was, what we found out was that that the information on the Slovak Facebook was not really primarily around fake news and disinformation. Certainly it was there. To my own perception, it was less than I was expected, and actually that was a very good news, because there was more type of a news of solidarity, helping and showing that people are disciplined and they really make sure that things are under control. I don't want to go more into the context, but that's how we try to build up the monitoring around COVID-19. You need to think about it in advance. What you want to show, because one thing is that you can create all type of analysis, but you need to make sure what you want to show. We wanted to see whether the disinformation is spread and to which extent, or if this is not the case, what are the posts which are really dominating the discussion on the Facebook. So we created the keywords, and through this new search, which is one of the new features on the CrowdAngle, that was achieved very, very easily. In fact, Russell will probably show you that more now, and if there will be any need, I might jump in again. Thank you very much. Now back to you, Russell.
Thank you very much, Ivan. So if you are still with us, let me try to show you now, if I manage this actual feature of how the CrowdAngle works. Can you just confirm that you can see my screen and you can see the CrowdAngle on the screen? Is it visible now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So unlike what Yara showed a couple of weeks ago, when for those of you who were present on that very interesting webinar, here this basically allows you the full access, and importantly for us, the biggest difference for us is actually the ability to work with historic data. Because as researchers, you know, we always like to make our data as comprehensive and as solid as possible. And here on social media, such as Facebook, for example, this is really important. I mean, that you can basically on public profiles and pages, because I should make a clear point that CrowdAngle does not allow you to scrap the data from private profiles. This new feature that Ivan mentioned, which is basically this search, allows you to focus on interactions, which are also on private accounts or private profiles. So let's, for example, test it. One disinformation which was circulated was this speech of this Forza Italia MP, who basically questioned the number of deaths in Italy. And this was picked up by one of the disinformation, one of the disinformation outlets, Hlavné správy. And so what I can do is I can actually just copy the URL of this article, and CrowdAngle will basically show me first of all the interactions, and on the very right you have the total number of interactions, and this includes also the interactions from private profiles. Here you can see the public profiles and interactions from public profiles. And here down, you have the whole list of who else basically share this information from the public profiles. So this really, this new search function that CrowdAngle developed is excellent, particularly when you are searching for a very specific piece of this information, and you are interested not only on the actual level of interactions, if it's really relevant for the banking, because and Yara explained this very well last time, that maybe not everything is really relevant, but when you see that here it's almost up to 6,000 interactions on Facebook, that I think is already relevant. Okay, let me go back to the dashboard. So to explain what we have to do when we are doing this type of project. So first, what you have to do is you have to create a list, and this is what Ivan did with the SK COVID-19 disinformation. I don't know if it's visible, but he included 111 Facebook pages into our system. Now with this, you can sometimes, you know, and I can show you, for example, for the US elections, I think it's very interesting. There are some public lists which are available for those of us who are basically onboarded to CrowdAngle. You don't have to basically do this manual inclusion of the Facebook profiles or groups. This is already done by people who are onboarded to CrowdAngle. But in our case, this was very specific, and Ivan had to do this basically manually. Now here you can basically set up the system to overperforming, underperforming, total interactions, and you can also choose if you want to do it for the, I don't know, last 7 days. For the, you can basically set up the time period as you wish. Here you have an opportunity to choose if you are interested in all posts or photos, links, videos. You can basically choose, and here you can still make a more advanced search, which is particularly relevant in the case of COVID-19. That, for example, you can see that without basically going deeper, without specifying these cluster words, you would get you know, posts which are, I mean, this one is, for example, related to the fight against racism. It's the member of this fascist party that we have in the parliament, SNS, and so on and so forth. So unless I go very specifically with which I can basically do here, where I can set up the more specific search for the keywords, I would not be able to basically generate automatically this type of you know, this type of information that I'm specifically looking for. What we did was basically we set up a system of I mean, here are all the words that Ivan included, and also the groups. And we set up the automatic system of viral and referral alerts, which were basically going to our email addresses as well as the email addresses of Digital Infospace Security Initiative. And they were the ones that then were doing the debunking. What we are planning to do is basically we will look at the whole period, as Ivan mentioned. I mean, starting from the 6th of March until June, and we will basically analyze more specifically all these posts which basically you know, had some COVID-19 related disinformation. And this is something that you could do either on this leaderboard, or there is another function which is called intelligence, which allows you basically to look at the specific accounts. So here I can basically look up the information which is related to to these pages. And let me just show you what sort of statistical information. The nice thing about this is that actually it automatically, not only that it comes with very precise information on the number of interactions, but it also creates charts. So so here we can select there are 111 different pages, but let me choose just the first 20 on the system, and I can also choose the date range. So here, for example, this is last 3 months, and here you can basically see that for these 20 pages, and again I can choose any pages out of this list. This was the situation with different types of posts getting different types of attractions. So here, maybe some of you who are familiar with the Slovak scene, you know that this Smer MP Luboš Blaha is known for circulating very sort of questionable posts, you know, not always very truthful posts, but he is very much known as really attracting a lot of interactions. I mean, he was the top person during our election related monitoring, and he also he's also getting really he's getting a lot of interactions here during this COVID-19 related information. But he may not be the one who is really circulating the COVID-19 disinformation. But for example, Luboš Hrica, he had, you know, several posts which, for example, about the US military exercise, which were really deceptive. So this is maybe just a flavor, maybe just to show you a little bit about the, you know, how powerful this CrowdTangle is. Again, the great thing is that you can go very specifically. You can see that basically the peak was really more in March and April, and here you can also click on the specific post which generated. So this one, for example, is related to coronavirus, and it's a post about a claim from the incumbent prime minister that the previous minister of interior bought, the tests which were too expensive, and the prime minister basically says that this was for no particular reason. But Luboš Blaha, as a member of Smer, is disputing this in this post. So maybe I will stop here, and if there are any questions, we'll be more than happy to address them.
Yes, thank you very much, Rastio and Ivan. Let me get back. So just a reminder to all of you, please, the best way to ask questions would be in the Q&A tab at the bottom or in the chat. I'm going to be following it, and Rastio's following it. So please feel free to pose your questions. In the meantime, I will have some questions, or I have maybe Rastio, because can you give a little bit more background on how is it possible to use CrowdTangle? It is possible for newsrooms, but to certain limits, it's to certain aspect, it's limited. And if you can please also show maybe the plugin that is free, accessible for everyone. I was showing it in the previous webinar, but probably not many people were watching it. So just to show that it still can be useful even if you don't have full access to CrowdTangle.
Sure. No, that's thank you very much. That's really very important explanation. So yes, the CrowdTangle was acquired by Facebook, I think in 2017. But previously it was set up as a social marketing tool. So it was mainly for media and also for maybe organizations which really wanted to have presence on social media. And this is an excellent way, basically, how you can actually monitor your presence. I mean, after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Facebook has been limiting the access because of this data protection, because of course they wanted to avoid a similar type of scandal. At the same time, you know, they have provided this access to CrowdTangle to research groups, to organizations like Memo98 that they felt was not really trying to misuse the data, but they are actually trying to find out things, in our case mainly the impact of social media on electoral integrity. So so basically, you know, it's for us, it took about 3 months. We approached Facebook. We approached Facebook in different parts. So it was not one particular person, for example, who is in charge of Slovakia in particular. We did approach her, but we also tried through the election section. And to be honest with you, I still do not know very precisely, you know, which of these contacts really worked. But after 3 months, and luckily prior to the Slovak elections, we were invited for a training. And then after we went through this training, during which they showed us how to work with CrowdTangle, we were finally onboarded. And as I said, it is really very good to have such access. But as Yara mentioned, it is also possible to get just something. Sorry, I just forgot to start sharing my screen. Just a second. I want to show you to those of you who are interested to see how you can actually download the Chrome extension. And is it visible now on my screen? Can someone confirm?
Yes,
okay,
yes.
Great. So so basically, yes, it's free. It's free Chrome extension, and you can basically use it for example, for your account, and it would show you basically the level of interactions on your you know, on your profile for some specific concrete posts. Or looks like I'm not logged in. That may be okay. Well, I don't remember now. Sorry, my password. So yeah, to save time, but it's really easy. I mean, all you have to do is really type in CrowdTangle Chrome extension, and you get you know, you get directly to the extension that you download, and then you log in on your Facebook, and then you can basically get information, but only per one particular profile or one posts on that profile at a time. So it does not give you the opportunity to compare, which is very important, obviously, particularly when you are doing election-related monitoring, and we for example focus on I don't know, 50 different stakeholders, and we want to see how they perform. So this type of comparison you can only get once you get the full access, as well as the full access to historic data.
All right, thank you, Rastio. We have actually a couple of questions, so I'm gonna go one after another. We do actually have James Morgan from CrowdTangle here now, so he sends his regards. Yeah, so if you are a newsroom, someone will request, you can contact CrowdTangle and try to request access as well. We didn't manage because apparently there was a big demand, so but we still in our team were able to kind of combine different tools, you know, to get some results that we could fact check and debunk. I mean, being in the Czech Republic, which is not that big country, I mean, even without these like really sophisticated and great tools, if you don't have access to them, well, you need to kind of mobilize volunteers and try to do whatever you can with the tools available. So yeah, so this was.
If I may just to add, I think it's related also, if I may, sort of, I mean, at least from my understanding, I think the reason is that there are many requests, but of course, James probably can be more specific here. But my understanding was that there are many requests, and also it was really excellent support that we have received from CrowdTangle once we heard the great news that we will be onboarded. We got an excellent training, and I think this is the main reason, that not only that they want to make sure that they have some kind of system in who is getting the access, but also they really provide excellent support, which was extremely useful for us. So yeah, thank you very much, James, and my best to Naomi as well.
All right, thank you, Rastio. So now the questions from our participants. Laura is asking, actually, how do you share with the public the information when you've identified a piece of disinformation or misinformation or concerning narrative? And maybe I will add to that question, if you can like practically share the lessons, because I mean, you were part of a collaborative effort, right, where you played the role of monitoring and there were other actors doing fact checking. So how do you do that, and where do you see the importance of actually sharing these outputs with the publics or institutions? Well, how does that work?
Yes, thank you very much. That's obviously the most important thing, is really to make sure that there is a system in place. I mean, I was going to show maybe a couple of more slides. Yes, I'm here. Which basically respond also to this question. So we basically published 5 reports during the parliamentary elections, during which we brought the attention of the public to I mean, since this was really the first such, let's say, monitoring of political parties during elections. I mean, there were similar efforts during the presidential election and also during the local election, but in our understanding, this was really the first election, the last parliamentary elections, where really Facebook played a role. We actually think that it really affected the dynamic of the campaign, particularly, you know, particularly the posts of Olano party, which basically talked about corruption, which really generated a lot of, I mean, when it was posted for the first time, they had 50,000 people basically connected live. And then later on, I think it was really, I don't remember now precisely, over 1 million interactions, I mean, for these particular posts from the French Riviera, where the incumbent prime minister was basically accusing the former minister of finance of stealing money from Slovak people. So this really influenced a lot the pre-election dynamic. But maybe coming back to that question from the perspective of COVID-19, this is basically why we created this partnership with groups such as Digital InfoSpace Security Initiative, and I think Victor Breiner is here on this webinar. So maybe if he wants, he can add. But we ourselves, we are not fact checkers or debunkers. You know, we think, we consider ourselves to be media monitors. So this is why this sort of synergy between groups that can do different things, for us it was really setting up the monitoring system and then providing this information to the Digital Infospace Security Initiative, and then they were the ones basically taking the next step, which was you know, fact checking that information and allowing or notifying the public about the problematic posts, and so that's when it comes to that initiative. When we are doing this during elections, we are the ones who are publishing the analysis. We are the ones who are basically raising concerns, or we are the ones who are analyzing this type of even disinformation when it happens.
All right, thank you, Rastio. There's actually one quite specific technical question from Victor, actually. If you can set up email alerts for keywords, especially, you know, from within specific custom set of sources.
Yes.
I guess from CrowdTangle.
Yeah, you can, I mean, not only that you can set it up, but you can actually choose between different options. You can basically set it up. The great part of CrowdTangle is that it allows you to also set it up for someone outside of your organization, because otherwise everything, I mean, the access is only shared inside the organization. So we are not in a position to give someone else this access. I mean, this was only given to us, and so we can only share it among us as colleagues of Memo 98. But for this type of, we can set up viral alert or referral alerts, which would give you a real-time information. So whenever something is posted, and it includes the keyword, it can go very quickly to the email. If you want to have more analytical system, you can set up this to be done on a. I mean, you can choose the periodicity. So it can be 24 hours. You can get simply updates which already look at a longer period of time. So it's really, in that sense, it's a very powerful tool that you can really choose what you want. Now, I also don't want to sound that we are now fully aware of everything that you can do with CrowdTangle. We are still, I mean, we got it in January, so we are still learning ourselves. But here, the lessons learned was really that we have to be very specific. If we didn't want to, I mean, first I set it up, this viral alert. In about 30 seconds, I had 700 emails in my mailbox, so completely spammed it. So you have to be very precise in how you set it up. But again, the great thing about CrowdTangle is that there are many webinars that they have done, and you can go to archives, you can look at these webinars, and that helps you also to do it, or you can directly approach your representative who can also help you. So, but yeah, the short answer to the question is yes, you can set up these emails, and it can really be done automatically.
All right, thank you, Rastio. Sarah's question is in the line, but before that, Laura had additional question to her previous question. When you were identifying the actors who were or monitoring the actors who were spreading disinformation and misinformation, were there some new or were they somehow different than the disinformation actors active before? Were there some new players? Absolutely. Or did they change? Did they change the strategy? Any learnings around that? Thanks.
Excellent question. Thanks. I should have mentioned that this is where perhaps was a bit more challenging for us, because previously we were mainly focusing on actors who were spreading political disinformation. Here and you made a very, very good point a couple of weeks ago about differentiations between misinformation and disinformation, because there are many Facebook sites that basically focus on health-related issues. Yeah, I don't know. For example, I mean, Baječný Lekar, for example, these type of websites that really their main goal is not really to disinform for political purposes, but mainly to get a lot of interactions. But they are spreading things like I don't know, you can cure the cancer with a baking soda or something like this, you know. So I would say there was a big category. I don't know if Ivan is still on the call, but because he was the one who was setting up the system. But there were many sites which really were spreading misinformation and disinformation related to health issues, which was a complete new category of actors that we had to include into the system. So yeah, in that sense, it was very new for us because normally we have, let's say, different actors around elections. I mean, who are mainly politicians and maybe some influencers, but yeah, there are many. In fact, I think more websites are those who basically have some history of spreading misinformation, disinformation on health-related issues.
There was actually one interesting moment that I remember, that one of the main disinformation websites called Hlavné Zprávy, they were actually debunking some of the disinformation that was spreading, right? There was this disinformation that the US military is rolling out in Europe, and it was actually this main disinformation actor who debunked that and said like, hey guys, this is...
As Ivan mentioned, I think we have to have always open minds. You know, we should not approach anything with some expectation that just simply because this is a platform or an outlet which has a history of spreading disinformation, that they would not be able to, you know, in this type of crisis, even to act a little bit more responsibly. I remember that this one that you mentioned was circulated also by this Luboš Hrica, who has a reputation of spreading disinformation, and he basically, there was a post with the US military, you know, getting, I think, to Italy, and was quite, I mean, he took an angle in this, I mean, which was supposed to be a regular exercise, but it was really used a lot. But I wanted to mention also another very interesting phenomenon, and we had a webinar on this topic with platforms. I mean, we had Google, Facebook, and Twitter. We also had ERGA, and also we had Ofcom, the British media regulator, and they did an excellent, very interesting survey, which showed that particularly during the crisis, people were more looking at serious information sources. So when it comes to your life, you know, people are probably more responsible when choosing the information sources. When it comes to, I don't know, elections or maybe other topics, they go for fun and they go for less responsible sources. But that we thought was very interesting finding.
Thank you. The time is running out, but we still do have 2 to 3 questions. So if anybody has to go, please feel free to go, and let's spend a couple more minutes with Rastio. So the question from Sarah: do you have any thoughts on how best the civil society organizations or also the election monitoring bodies can best tackle disinformation on COVID-19, especially during elections period? Would you just add COVID terms or keywords to overall monitoring, or do you have any other strategies? So if I understand it correctly, there are already actors who are in a well positioned to do election monitoring, and now just what can be their role of including COVID-19 keywords into the monitoring, especially during elections?
Excellent question, and this is basically what you know, what we have seen. I mean, there are many organizations that are looking into this issue. Obviously, it's almost like a Hamletian question whether to organize or not to organize elections, you know, around this pandemic. We saw some successful attempts to organize elections, like in South Korea. But one has to also remember that South Korea, while in February they were really affected a lot by COVID-19, but they already had the experience from the previous pandemic, and so I think they were in a much better position. Now, I think probably the question was more related to the actual monitoring. So yes, I think once you decide that there will be elections, and once you are monitoring the elections, I would certainly include maybe additional actors to see whether there is any direct impact or whether there is any direct disinformation which relates both to elections and also is using maybe this topic of COVID-19 to actually maybe disinform people, because I mean, what comes to mind is, for example, voter suppression, that you can have information, and I think this was happening already in some countries, that because of that COVID-19, maybe there will be a change in the voting system, and maybe people should not go to the polling station where they normally go. But and so this is extremely important, particularly from the position of electoral management bodies. And here I would refer to the excellent work done by IFES, which has been running briefing series about how to tackle the COVID-19 related issues. I mean, be it disinformation, be it other issues, and how to organize elections, and what EMBs could do really to prepare society. So I think we, not only that we have to include maybe some of these new actors to media monitoring or social media monitoring, but we also have to make the bodies more resilient, I mean, to this type of infodemic. And again, I think we all hope that this COVID-19 situation will once disappear, but I'm afraid that there may be new similar pandemics in the future. So I think it's really important that this sort of digital literacy is done, and the proper bodies are really making proper moves when it comes to this type of resilience building.
Thank you, Rastio. And we have
Ivan wanted to add something.
Please go ahead.
Just one addition to that. Absolutely, what Rastio said. I think it's crucial that during those periods or during those elections that are happening right now in this sort of limited time, there is a Serbian election coming in few days. And I've been part of one webinar yesterday organized by IRI and our colleagues from Serbia, Birodi, and that was excellent example how this can work, because they included into the pre-election monitoring also this topical monitoring, including COVID-19 topics, and this is exactly how to effectively cover it, because it's not, as it is seen as health issue, it's very in some countries very effectively communicated as a strategy or policy tool, and it's basically very much used in a political sense. So it's very good to perceive it in a more contextual perspective. And also not only from the perspective of COVID-19, but I think topical monitoring, that's what my bottom line is. The topical monitorings are very important for all types of election-related monitorings or any other types of media monitorings, because it's not only about one issue. Very often it's context, and once you are just prioritizing one over others, you might simply miss something. And to me, this serves as a lesson that even those who are monitoring political issues might maybe think about increasing their portfolio and then focus, and also how to structure the monitoring, because it can create very different outcomes eventually. So as Rastio pointed out, it's really very important at the beginning really to think about what the monitoring really is composed of. And then you can actually analyze it at the end once you have it set it properly at the beginning.
And if I may, actually I didn't mention now it came to my mind that I also promised to say a couple of words about these divisive narratives. I mean that we monitor using the content analysis. So we did a project during the EP elections, and we basically monitored the social media, particularly I think Facebook, in 4 Visegrad countries. And very quickly, if people, let me see if I can very quickly still show the results. Is it visible on my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. So this was basically, we included narratives into the monitoring, and we wanted to.
I'm not seeing your screen. Are you sharing the screen?
Yeah,
I don't see it.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Please double check.
Okay. Now. Okay. Is it?
Okay. Good. Perfect.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I will try to. So what we did was basically, apart from the statistics on interactions and a number of posts and number of shares and comments, we also included additional variables which had to do with topics and narratives. And so, first of all, in these 4 countries, we tried to figure out whether the discussion was more focusing on home affairs or EP elections. And then we also tried to see what were the type of issues which were discussed and on the posts. And then also what was the level of interaction. And I chose specifically Hungary because we had very interesting results, for example, when it came to the topic of migration and the way how it was used by the Fidesz ruling party. So here you can see that it was the 3rd most discussed topic on Facebook. But what was very interesting that it was the most, it was the topic number 1 when it came to interactions. So it was a proof that this topic is very divisive and people really reacted to it, and there was a clear, this was a clear signal that the ruling party was really working with this, and that they were amplifying this topic, and they have been doing this also now during the COVID-19 situation. So I just wanted to bring a more concrete example of how you can actually work with topics and narratives, because sometimes we are asking ourselves, so we are doing this monitoring of social media, but what does it really show us? And I think the answer is that we are trying to really measure the impact on the electoral integrity, while we will never be in a position to say whether this type of disinformation really changed the outcome of elections. I mean, perhaps we are in a position to say that it could have a bigger impact in particular electoral systems, where you decide the elections by, I don't know, a few hundred votes, but we will never be in a position to say that for sure, this really had an impact on the result. But we will be in a position to actually show or see if there are divisive topics and narratives, if people are sort of spreading lies to basically work with people's emotions, that this has an impact, because people should be able to make their choice free of manipulative interference.
Okay, thank you, Rastio. And let's go to the very last question, because time is running out. One of the participants is asking about one specific case when there was a piece of information about ibuprofen being spread in different applications, WhatsApp, Viber, messengers, and others. Then one of the kind of relevant sources, University of Vienna, debunked it, denied the news, but then we found out something else. So how to clarify that type of confusion? I dare to answer instead of you, because that's not something that you were focusing on, and that's not necessarily the topic of the current session. So we'll be more than happy to organize follow-up sessions on also how to communicate this information to publics in order not to confuse the public even more. And I'm sure that many effective...
I will add to what you say, I will add to that because I remember this specific case, but go ahead first and then maybe I will just add.
But my actually questions that I really would like to know your answer or your ideas is actually the fact when the disinformation is more and more spread through these messenger applications, right? Like WhatsApp, emails, you know, stuff that, you know, you cannot use the traditional website or social media analytics tools. So it's much more challenging. How could we deal with that, especially during the elections, when we cannot apply these apps to these kind of private conversations?
Excellent. And let me maybe just very briefly, because I remember this case, and I also remember that, yes, for example, I received this piece of disinformation through WhatsApp, exactly. And also there were other things that were received by Messenger. I mean, first of all, and this was what was part of that initiative, is that it was actually initially hosted by the health ministry, and the idea was that we would identify the disinformation, and then there were others who were basically supposed to debunk it. But the whole idea was that the ministry would actually provide experts on COVID-19, so that we would, you know, once it's debunked, that there is really professional who includes his or her position on that debunked material. And so I think this is, whether or not it really worked, I mean, it's probably a topic for another discussion, but I think I would like to stress that importance that you really, and particularly in that type of situation where, you know, it's sort of, it's so crucial that once you do this debunk, that it's really based on some solid evidence and is not just what one doctor thinks, you know, because that, as we remember, there were many cases where doctors themselves were sending very sort of misleading messages. So that's really why it's so crucial, you know, to have someone part of the debunking team who is actually a real expert on that particular topic. We are not, you know, so that's why for us, it was very clear that our role would be in setting up that monitoring system. And again, this was done by us and GlobSec. And then there were others who took part of that sort of second phase. And maybe last point, I think the research shows that it's so important to properly communicate, you know, this sort of, you know, debunked information. So there are excellent efforts such as Skoda Story, for example, that are using storytelling, you know, because people are not automatically just going to see the debunked information. So I think this is so important. To your second question, I mean, there is already, there are many projects that focus on WhatsApp, for example. We have done it ourselves in Nigeria, but it's really important that there are certain ethical conditions in place. And here I would probably bring example of First Draft and their monitoring in Brazil during the presidential election. They refused to penetrate, for example, the WhatsApp private groups and try to get the information out of that. They set up a hotline system, public hotline system, where people could actually post their concerns about the type of disinformation or language that is happening inside these groups, because the fact that they are encrypted, the fact that they are much more difficult to get, I mean, this is obviously amplifying the options, you know, to really have a much more effective type of disinformation spread. It is possible to monitor. It's more difficult. Once you do it, there are other groups that would actually use the information just by penetrating these private groups, for example. But then I would say the minimum condition is to anonymize the data, because now we have GDPR, we should be also very careful about not spreading, the personal information as researchers. So yes, it's possible there are groups that are doing this type of monitoring, but it's more difficult because of the encryption, because of the fact that it's not so easily accessible.
Right, thank you very much. Very helpful and interesting. So that's it. Thank you everyone for your participations, for your questions. We will try to organize some follow-up session on some follow-up topics related to the COVID infodemic. You will be updated. We will keep you updated through emails. And so please stay tuned and we will let you know when the next event is coming up. So thank you everyone. Thank you Rastio and thank you Ivan. Have a nice day everyone.
And thank you very much to Yara and Transitions for organizing this webinar. And thanks also for your participation.
Our pleasure. All right. Bye, everyone.